Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Economic Prosperity and Performance Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Standard, obviously, item 1 is to announce the fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and the side of the room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Thank you. Item 2 is to remind everybody that this meeting is webcasted for the public to watch live and to retain as a record of the meeting. To receive apologies for this evening, I have one apology from Councillor Mrs. Washbourne. Resignations and replacements. This evening, Councillor Miss Bean is replaced by Councillor Mrs. Tucker. Councillor Mrs. Burgess is replaced by Councillor Marks, and Councillor Keating is replaced by Councillor Harvey. Declarations of conflict of interest or whipping decisions. I'm not aware of any. Urgent items, again, not aware of any. Item 7 on the agenda is to confirm the minutes of the last meeting. Here somewhere. Is everybody happy for me to sign those? Great. Thank you. Item 8, a member and public participation. I don't think we have any members of public speaking this evening. Item 9, standing invitation relevant portfolio holders to present reports of their activities, etc., and or bring forward policy development issues. Under item 9, we do have paper B in our pack. Councillor Andrew Finney is otherwise engaged, so our leader, Councillor Saunders, will present the paper this evening for us. So I could hand over to Councillor Saunders.
I assume you can hear down that end. That's okay. Yes, my apologies on behalf of Andrew. He should be at the Question of Business event, where I think there's 150 businessmen discussing the economic future of the borough. Though I did hear he wasn't feeling very well, so he may not even have made that. But let's hope that that's not the case. What I want to do using his slides, and it's always a bit dangerous when you use somebody else's slides because it's not necessarily in the way that you would choose to put it yourself, is to just really bring you up to date with thinking on the issue of how we're going to unlock our growth for the future, and particularly revolving around the issues of how we're going to fund that growth for the future, because it's all fine having lots of ambition. You've got to think about how you're going to put in place the necessary funding streams that you'll require, and it's particularly relevant, I think, that this should be coming up for discussion in the week when the government published their response to the Heseltine report, which deals with a lot of those issues at that particular moment in time. So I will try and crack on as quickly as possible. I think it's that button. Why we're raising it now? Very simply because there's an awful lot we've got to do. And I'm not going to dwell on this very long because you know them all. A whole load of things, all of which are going to cost money. Yet none of them can we really stop doing if we wish to have a vibrant and exciting place in which to live. So we have to continue with our development of Manydown, and also for that matter to the east as well, in the light of the chosen sites. Basingview is already underway. We currently have a map looking at the leisure park. The top of the town has been an issue for a long while. It's time we got on and did something about it. Underpinning all that has to be our affordable housing delivery, to make sure that we deliver places where people can live at the same time as having all these other places where they can work or they can play. The hospital is looking at its new facilities as well, and at the same time we have got employers in the borough that we want to make sure we retain, and we want to be able to attract new ones so that all the people who live here can work here. We have got to get on and get our local plan finished. For whatever reason, there's no point in going over that tonight. It was delayed longer than any of us would probably have wanted. We don't want it delayed any longer because that will just make worse situations for everybody. But if we're going to do that, there has to be significant infrastructure put in place to meet the requirements of that plan. We will have to look at using new funding streams and new mechanisms. It's highly unlikely that just Section 106, SIL as it will become, or our own financial reserves will be enough to meet all the infrastructure requirements that we will have going forward. So we can't do it on our own. We've got to work through people like the LEP with their growing places, pinch point punching, etc. But we've also got to look at other means of leveraging in funding into the borough. There's a lot we can do actually to learn on how other authorities have already been successful in their own ways at doing this. Listed a number there: Woking, Milton Keynes, Exeter, Devon. Kettering is a very interesting one where they put together a really very good financial case to be able to justify significant investment from the government in their infrastructure in advance of the other work that they were doing, particularly that was on a housing development. So that is a very positive thing. There also is a lot of thinking going on at the moment around this. The LGA published its paper on unlocking growth through partnership and how we can work together better with other people who wish to be involved in this. The Berkeley Group published their own Delivering Growth Through Localism paper. And of course we have, if nobody's read it, looks enormous, but it actually is a very good read. For once, it's a government paper which is worth reading, and it actually reads well. And it's challenging, and it really has, his personality comes through it very clearly. It's basically cut through the crap, and and let's get on with things in a positive way. And you have to, if you don't agree with all 90 odd recommendations, you've at least got to say that it tackles the issues very well. And of course now we've got, this week, came out yesterday I think, the government's response, which basically says we're going to accept most of the recommendations in the Heseltine report. So those two I think are essential pieces of reading, when we've got nothing else to do at night. We said in the council plan that if we want to retain Basingstoke as being a really good place to live, we've got to be ambitious and creative in what we do. That standing still just is not an option. It's not a natural situation for any organism to stand still and do nothing. All it does is atrophy. And if it atrophies, then we will finish up seeing a lot of the things that we take for granted now, a lot of the facilities that we like to use, decline into decay and then fade away. The economy is vital, and it's vital to enable us, be the motor to enable us to revitalise and renew key parts, giving us the jobs, giving us the facilities, making us a destination of choice not just for the residents of the borough but also for the surrounding area, because that in itself then brings in additional funding. It creates a bigger, better economy. We also have to make sure that all the people who live here have the places that they want to live in, and that means supporting regeneration as well as building new homes and building a good balance of affordable and private homes as well. And we need to and in doing that, I think we need to make sure that we use our assets. Yeah, we can use our assets to keep council tax low, and I've not actually come across anybody yet who's suggesting that we actually want to use our assets to make council tax high. That doesn't seem to be a particularly laudable objective, certainly not for residents. But there are different ways of using our assets to attract investment, and I think we have to open our minds up to that. It's not just a question of putting it all in the bank and then waiting to see what return we get and using that capital. What we have is, I think, a tremendous number of positive aspects to where we live that we can capitalise on to encourage people to want to be part of our project of regenerating the life of Basingstoke. We do have high employment. It could always be higher, but compared with a lot of other areas, even in the southeast, it's good. We have a relatively buoyant economy, again, compared with other areas in the southeast, and certainly with elsewhere in the country, it's good, and we are attracting new businesses. We have a very high level of start-up new business, which again is good. We have really good leisure and retail and cultural facilities, so that there's a lot that you can do when you've finished your working day. We have got good infrastructure on the whole, and that leads to low congestion. It's surprising how little people actually do complain about congestion. I know there's bottlenecks everywhere if you choose the wrong time of day, but on the whole you can get around most places most of the time reasonably well. We have low crime and a crime rate which is falling. We are very lucky that we have community cohesion. I hope it's not luck. We've worked very hard over the years to try and make sure that communities do come together. But it's worked. And that's a very positive aspect. We don't have some of the disunity and some of the frictions that you find in other areas within Hampshire even, let alone within the south of England. And we have a relatively stable income. Our council tax and business rates are pretty stable. We've got investments, which, okay, you can argue about whether they're the best form of investment to have, but again, they provide a pretty stable degree of return, as do the rents. And of course, we've benefited from quite significantly in the past from new homes bonus. So overall, we've got a pretty good quality of life, and it's Basingstoke and Dean, the borough, is a good place that people might wish to invest. And I think that's reflected in the way that people think about where they live, where our residents think. And most of them, 92%, are happy with where they live. And believe it or not, even 77% are quite happy with the way that the council runs things, which I think is a very good figure to have. It's the most important things that add to people's life, apart from crime and disorder, which is always a key factor. Affordable housing, the single most important thing, particularly amongst young people and those renting. Whereas traffic congestion, I say, is relatively low importance. But 93% feel that we should be providing homes for local people and also providing land for employment opportunities. So when you look back over the last 10 years and just look at the opportunities that we've taken, quite a lot has happened. Whether it's through from the new growth point status and the 6 million funding allocated for Basingview, through the EU funding, the Diamond for Growth designation, to the broadband pilots that are now running, and of course then getting on to the starting Enterprise M3 and being the main motor for putting together Enterprise M3 and then joining with the other organisations within it, but actually getting some return already in terms of the pinch point funding coming for Junction 6. The list of things that we could do, and some lists of things that need to be done are included in Appendix 1 or A or whatever it is within the paper that you've got there. But just to name a few things there, Many Down we know about. At least we've got, I think, now cross-party agreement that we need to develop Many Down, and that's a very positive thing. And I'm not going to go into lots of mudslinging and other bits and pieces. What we want to do is look forward positively together. I think I'm very pleased that we've actually got some really good owners of Festival Place. People who have a lot more money than Grosvenor are prepared to be much more involved in future investment within the town, in their own self-interest, of course, but then nobody does anything if it's not in their own financial self-interest, other than public bodies. So their ownership should be a catalyst, certainly will not be a hindrance to a really positive regeneration at the top of the town. We've got to look at new approaches to our property trading and investments to make sure that we do free up some of the things that we have at the moment. They may not be invested in the best places. Very interesting question is, if you've bought some things and you've got some things, would you be better off selling those to regenerate something somewhere else? As long as you've got a revolving cycle of it, that you're not disenriching the borough as you go through, I think there could be quite good cases for doing that. But if we're going to do it, and if we're going to look at the other opportunities that there are for subsidising some of our business growth in the initial terms, in terms of rates, and of course having business rates ourselves now rather than being a central government thing, even though it's been hedged around with so many constraints that it's not nearly as attractive as we at first thought it was going to be. But nevertheless, we've still got them. There's the opportunity to really provide some interesting incentives for people to come here. They'll only come if we have a coherent growth strategy. They'll only come if we have a coherent delivery and investment plan. They'll only come if we've got a local plan that supports that. And they'll only come if they believe that we believe in it. A whole series of funding pots that we could be looking at. I think we have to put to one side this idea, and in fact this is reflected very much in the government's response and Heseltine's thing of having a single funding pot and a local funding pot. We have a whole series of different ways that we might be able to access money in the future, but it's not saying, well, this bit has to be for this bit has to be for that. We've got to be much more flexible in our approach. So still Section 106 will always be there in one way or another. New homes bonus could be there, depends on the colour of government that we have going forward, who knows. LEP funding, I think, will stay there, and the pinch point funding we're already saying. Various other forms of funding, whether they're TIFs or whether it's land receipts from property trading, whether we get it from government direct. It's very interesting talking, and I don't think it should be a surprise, but you go and talk to ministers and you say, well, what happens if we have a plan that says we need to do this and we need to do this, but we can't pay for it from our own resources, and we can't pay from it here, and we can't pay from it from there. How are we on earth going to meet your requirements to build houses or whatever? And the answer is, well, when you've got a proposal, come and talk to us. And I think it's very clear steer is being given that if you have a good proposal which clearly generates wealth in the overall terms, whether it's through economic prosperity or however it's generated, government will be prepared to look favourably upon well-constructed and positive proposals. There are, of course, the opportunities to leverage in other financial vehicles from the city or wherever, and there's plenty of money around for doing that at the moment. There's plenty of cash in the market, but again, provided that you can provide a well-organised, well-written deal, something which excites people, that they feel they're going to make a decent return out of it. And that's where we possibly have an advantage, in that we do have our own resources that we can use as match funding for that. So we've got the possibility to turn on some of those types of funding which other authorities might not have. But I think if we're going to do that, and this is really the point, was just to bring you up to date on where the thinking is going and what we need to do, to realise the vision and to make the ambition more than just an ambition, but something which is more concrete. But 4 things that we need to do. First of all, we've got to make sure that we do promote ourselves with pride and with conviction. I mean, there will always be things in the borough that could be improved, that could be done better. But we have so much going positively that's good about the borough. We need to make sure that when we do promote it, we are all together on the same side, saying, yeah, this is a place which provides a good future for its residents and which can provide a good future for those people who want to be part of our project going forwards. We have to make sure that we put that offer forward as a joined up place with all the various partners involved in what we do into one clear concept of what we're trying to achieve over the next 20 to 30, maybe even 40 years. At the same time, we've got to develop dialogue with the government and through the LEP as well to maximise our funding opportunities, to move ourselves up from being just another district council, to move ourselves up to being one of the key councils in which people wish to invest within our area. And to do that, we can't do it on our own, obviously, as a council. We've got to have buy-in from our partners, whether it's BASP or whether it's the business community, the county council, the LEP, our RSLs, a whole series of people. What I can say is that when we took the opportunity to discuss this approach with the business forum, they were very, very much behind it. No doubt we'll get some feedback tonight from the question of business events. We can discuss, and there are in the papers all sorts of things that one might do, might not do. No doubt the whole thing will go through a series of evolutions as we go forward. But I think my personal view is that if we do this, then we can put in place the real key drivers for a very successful future for the borough in the future. If we don't do it, if we walk away from it saying it's too complicated, it's too difficult, it's too big, we're out of our league, we're not doing this, that or the other, then it will be a very sad and unfortunate future that we will be guaranteeing for our residents. Now, that's not what I came into politics to do. I shouldn't think it's what any of us came into politics to do. So I would hope that for once we can put aside various political divisions, really get behind this, because I think it is actually a very worthwhile way forward, and something which we shouldn't talk about forever and a day. We need to get on and do. I think I finished. Your turn.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, members. Yeah, for listening. Very tentatively. Questions? Councillor Regan.
Just in terms of, you're right, the town's got to be marketed, because we're an ideal. I don't think enough has been said about our ideal position actually for marketing in transport links. I mean, we're only 50 minutes from central London, and we're right by Gatwick and Heathrow international airports, especially to North America, and also the M3. I think more could have been made about that. Our actual locations, one of our most strongest marketing tools. I think last.
I'd agree with you entirely. I mean, it comes down to that old phrase, isn't it? Location, location, location. You're on main route to London on the train. It's 35 minutes to Heathrow. Not in heavy traffic area, but in a good time. You've got two motorways. I agree with you. Location is going to be one of the key things, particularly when it comes down to looking at businesses for whom location or connectivity is important. There'll be increasingly businesses done in smaller and smaller office blocks and been working from home by internet or whatever. But there will still be other businesses. For instance, take Sainsbury's, where I remember went with Paul to they're enlarging it yet again to be one of the biggest ones in the country. So they see it as being a very good place to be. And Sainsbury's don't make those kind of investment decisions lightly.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the enlightened presentation. And there's a lot good about Basingstoke. It's a good place to live and a good place to come to work. I would particularly like to hear a bit more about developing a marketing strategy to promote Basingstoke. I rather thought, we'd started this work some time ago, and would have perhaps hoped that developing wasn't the word that we'd be using right now. It would be that we've actually got one, because definitely it's an urgent issue, and perhaps if there isn't sufficient resource being put into doing that, then I would ask perhaps we could consider maybe putting more in.
I think the simple answer is we haven't put enough resource into it. We should put more resource into it. Part of the problem, I think, is that we've not had the full product package until now. If you know what it is that you're going to sell with all these projects which we listed there, it makes it easier once you've got that in as a total package. But I think you can't. It is, so I made the point earlier on, it's a very competitive marketplace that we're in. I mean, we're up against the likes of Swindon and Reading and all sorts of other areas around us, Woking, other people who will be probably having similar presentations from some officer or chief executive somewhere. We need to make sure that our voice is heard louder than them, better than them, in a more professional fashion than them. You can't do that, one, without the necessary expertise to do it. Now, I think we're very lucky that we've probably got within our business community a lot of that expertise. that we need to tap into, people who are here working for other companies, but who have already expressed an interest in becoming part of this process. And I think we need to tap into them and make the most use of that. We'll also need other professional support as well to come into that. And we get that to a certain extent through working through, for instance, with our development partner, Basing View, which you're going to be discussing later on. But you get people like Muse who come in here and they know what to do and how to go out and attract those people. So that can help a lot. But I agree with you. I think we need to put more resource into it, more finance into it, and to really raise our game in terms of the professionalism with which we do it.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, Clive, I remember sitting there 10 years ago, 11 years ago, with Brian previous before that, and the presentation can almost repeat itself year on year on year. And so I think really the question I want to ask you, and where I'd like to drill a little bit, is to say what lies beneath that, because we could repeat a lot of the lines, and I think, as you've highlighted yourself, it's beneath that where the proof of the pudding is, really. One of the things I think that I find interesting, sat here as a substitute member, is listening to you present your presentation and then listening to the debates around P&I, and in particular the last debate on P&I, where the critical friend report was given. And one of the things that was interesting about that report was the demographic changes for our workforce, and in particular the contraction that we're going to see of working age people on the basis of the current direction of travel, and the need to address that economically if we want to carry on in exactly the way you propose. Or we build our economy towards an ageing workforce, the 60 to 70-year-olds, and encourage them to become, as it were, a much, much larger part of our workforce. Now, that was the debate around the table at P&I, linked to the local plan, linked to the housing numbers, linked to everything, because A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. And I'd appreciate your view on how you translate that very different debate that had very different conclusions to what you've said tonight.
Well, I'm glad you found it a useful thing, because I watched it on the webcast, and what I thought it was really useful was it does help when you get real professional help and support involved in these things, rather than trying to do it ourselves or all become experts in demographic analysis, which none of us are to the level that they were. So it's positive. I get a little bit concerned when you talk about sort of the 60s and 70-year-olds, and they might still be working. Some of us still are, it seems to me. And actually, when you think about it, you know, we're still working and we don't intend to stop working. So there is an element at which the whole ageing thing is moving forward, but necessarily the functions that you carry out are still perfectly capable of being carried out. But horrendous thought that you've actually got to look forward to another 20 or 30 years of life after that when you stop. Clearly we are going to have to provide different sorts of facilities for people to cope with that lifespan. But we can only provide those provided we've got a good working population in whatever fashion however that might be provided. So it is a question of making sure that we do have a really good business community running that. That is the motor that moves everything forward, I think. And what do they need to have? I mean, business can be in different areas. Leisure can be, and providing the facilities for the aging population to live and enjoy themselves during that period. They're not necessarily disabled because they're older. Providing them those facilities is actually a business in itself. So that can of itself recycle wealth, can recycle economic activity. Clearly, what was right for us 10 years ago, if you were having these same discussions 10 years ago, I was still working 10 years ago in business, that what was right then wouldn't necessarily be right now, looking at the demographic patterns going forward. And I'm sure there will be somebody sitting in where I'm sitting and somebody different sitting where, or you might still be here, but it certainly won't be me, in 10 years' time having the same, having similar discussions, but with a slightly different perspective. What we enjoy now is what was put in place 20 or 30 years ago. And I think we owe it to the people who are going to be here in 20 or 30 years' time not to sit around discussing it forever and a day, but to get on and put some things in place for them, for the future. And that's what this is really about, saying there are some things here that we can agree about the dressing around it and some of the peripheral things, but there are some key things here that we need to have, we need to do, we need to get on with, and hopefully we can persuade everybody to push together, because that way we become a much more attractive proposition to outside investors who, whether we like it or not, we're going to have to attract to help us pay for all this and finance it.
Thank you, Chair. Hear where Clive is coming from on this and appreciate what you're saying. When you talk to the business community, the one thing that they... People and their ringtones, it's a... Adam? Yes. I like it. That's fine. I was going to say, when we talk to the business community, I think that the four things that we've picked up that they've identified are issues for them is very important in terms of small business access to finance. And in Basingstoke, as in around the country, but particularly for our small business sector, that is still a major issue for them. The second thing is public sector cuts impacting on the private sector itself. And that is a big issue, again, for a lot of the smaller businesses, but still some of the big ones as well. And that is having an effect in terms of their ability to sustain themselves in the private sector because of the cuts to the public sector. Skills and infrastructure, like you've highly said. Now, the issue there that I think is really important, and again, we've not raised it here, youth unemployment and the skills gap. And they are issues in Basingstoke that are genuine because they're real life issues, I think, that we pick up in casework. And finally, innovation and where we can foster innovation. Now, maybe 3EN was not the right model. Totally appreciate criticisms of that. But the intent and the design behind it was. And where's the replacement? Where's the initiative, if you like, to see that followed through? And finally, I think the other bit that does have a relevance to us is another £2.5 billion in cuts. Where is that going to hit in terms of service provision and support that we can offer? Where does that hit in terms of real life issues that employees, that the workforce are going to face simply to sustain themselves, to get through what's coming down the line? And I'm sorry, but front pages like today, on Monday, with the Gazette, don't sell Basingstoke, and they don't do us any favours when we have a deputy leader of the council kicking our local schools. And I thought that was disgraceful. So as leader of the council, I'd like to ask you tonight, what is your view of what was said in the Gazette? Because you're talking about marketing us, and you're talking about putting forward the best image, and that most certainly was not.
You're not sorry. You're not sorry at all. No, you're not. Anyway, I'm not. I'm far be it from me to criticise the Gazette, especially they're sitting over there. And I think he wrote the article as well. I think even Hampshire would recognise that they have a problem with people's perception of the quality of education in the borough. They would argue that that actually is a false impression, that there is a lot of good work that is being done, but you can't get away from the fact that a lot of people are continuing to send their children out of the borough to be educated because they perceive that they will not get the level that they wish to have. That is, I think, something which will take a time to turn around. There is due to be, in the very near future, a fairly major meeting trying to bring the heads of schools in, along with Hampshire, in to talk and work out how we can have a plan. And my view has always been that an integral part of this is making sure that schools do not stay locked behind their walls and thinking of themselves as being a separate sector to the rest of things. They've got to get involved, and they've got to become involved in dealing with some of the issues like the skills gap and other issues like that. They've got to be making sure that what they're preparing people for is the workplace environment in the way that the workplace environment wants people to be prepared for it. So I think that there is a lot of work which, whilst we're not responsible for the education, we can do, and we can say it positively. I think what was being talked about originally there was the particular situation in Bramley that rather got sort of enlarged into talking about other general areas. I think it was probably an unfortunate enlargement because I'm not suggesting that it was enlarged, unfortunately, by the person who wrote it, but it was just unnecessary to have enlarged it in that way. I'd much rather we try and encourage everybody on the education side to work as closely as we can as being part of the total process.
Do you support the idea of a free school, private school being built on Manydown in that context as was described on Monday?
Do you know, quite frankly, I've never given any thought. We will have to build a school on Manydown. That's absolutely certain, I think. We'll probably have to build more than one school on Manydown. But what sort of school that should be, I've not given any thought to at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Tilbury.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm always a bit concerned when sort of people say, yeah, things have got to grow all the time. You can't sort of everything's going backwards. I mean, I come from sort of background of process engineering, where the main thing is stability, and I think that's what you want. I think there's got to be I've said this time and time again. There's got to be the size of this town is about the right size, and I think that's about now. And I'm not suggesting you have sort of one company and one out you only replace that, or even housing. I think you're going to need some sort of growth, and you will get change because your companies will go. If you look at the big companies that ran when I was an apprentice, I mean, most of them are gone now. Lansing Bagnalls, Smiths, they're all gone as well, aren't they? All right, the one I work for is one of the few left, but they're a fraction of the size they used to be. So things will change. I think we accept that there, but I think you can't. I think for too long we tried to have economic growth as the answer to every problem. There, there'll be more older people. Oh, we need more growth to cope with that, and of course what happens when they get older? Well, we need even more, and it's just exponential there. So, and I did watch the critical friend analysis. Unfortunately, I've managed to put my eye problems. I put the laptop on the floor and watched it, which was quite interesting. But the point that at least 3 times they were asked the question about the link between economic growth and housing growth, and I think they made the clear point that if you're looking for jobs-led growth, that will have an impact. You will have to build a lot more houses for that, and we've had a lot of talk in the past about. I mean, Horace was always keen on things like, was it smart growth, isn't it, or as engineers call it, increased productivity. That's it. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as the less people doing more, and you see it with mechanisation, all those. I mean, the paper mill in Oban employs 300 people now. In the 60s, it employed 1,500 people. Well, that was more jobs than there were people in Overton, employed there. So there's obviously this linkage there, and I think we can't forget that there. And I mean, Diane will remember the work we've done in Laverstoke Mill on that. In the best part of the year, we were sort of remember the top secret squirrel club with that one, because we weren't allowed to tell anyone what was planned there. But of course, the irony was, with the plan we had before, the plan was to turn it into a rather dreadful housing development, and this other one came along, and it was just the circumstances that, ironically, the financial crash actually made it more possible, because they probably would have gone ahead with the housing scheme otherwise. But I think what we got out of it is much better, and retained employment on the site. But I think we need policies around that, because I'd argue for years that there were people out there who wanted sites like this, and of course then they phoned me up and said they wanted a site like this, and it was quite surreal, really. And yet we'd argue this for a long time over the years. And I think the education one is an interesting one. I mean, I think it's also companies that need to have a role to play.
Can I just sort of steer you towards a question?
Yeah, sorry.
And then we'll have a debate later on.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the trouble. Yeah, I think with education, are we able to work more with the companies? Are they able to feed back into these things? I mean, going back to when I was an apprentice, I worked for an electromechanical company, actually ITT down the road, and yet we were sent there, and the courses that were run in those days very often didn't suit us at all. In fact, one of the things we spent a lot of time learning about was thermodynamics and such like, which is, which was great, but it was all aimed at what the businesses that had been in Basingstoke 20 years before, which had largely gone. Steam engine, I remember having to work out the radius of gyration of a paddle steamer, and the fact that it stuck with me for 30 years, indicated. But I think that's the thing as well, with the tech college. I mean, when I was there, they were turning out bricklayers and engineers. I mean, it seems to be a college of hairdressing these days. So, yeah, I mean,
if I got him, I mean, I think very quickly, growth. There will be growth whether we want it or not. People are living longer, and unless we actually start killing off the older generation, which I personally am not in favour of, as I get closer and closer to it, that the population will grow, regardless of any inward migration or anything else like that. The population it has grown, it is likely to keep growing. All the signs are that the foundation's been laid for some quite significant population growth in about the next 40, 50 years, because if you look at all the primary schools that are now chock-a-block full, those people are going to be in prime breeding stock in about 20 years' time, and they'll all be doing exactly the same thing. So that is going to create growth. I agree with you, we do not necessarily have to have more business. I mean, what you actually see is that businesses are contracting in terms of the size of space that they take up, but they are nevertheless economically growing. What you have got to have is economic growth, and that is the key thing. Now, whether we need, I mean, it's a big argument, will we ever fill Basing View? Who knows? I don't know. Nobody could tell you whether we'll ever fill it, whether that is the right amount of space that we need. We might suddenly find that we become a centre for some industry that we've not really thought of that does want to take it all up because they all want to gang together. But we will have to have growth, and if we want to maintain the quality of life and the standard of life for people, we have got to make sure that we are getting that growth locally so that we can invest in the facilities which we will want to use to maintain that quality of life. So that, I think, is an essential part about it. I think on the school side of it, I've always had a view that schools do not fully understand business. I used to tear my hair out, as you can see. For people we would recruit, young people we would recruit who couldn't write a letter. You know, they can't actually do the basics of grammar to be able to put a letter together in a coherent fashion. That's useless to a business if you can't write a proper coherent letter. So why wasn't that being really taught just as one of the basic things? And I'm sure other businesses will be able to identify other things, and I'm not quite sure what the market for paddle steamers is these days, but even that must have a use somewhere. So I think there is a lot more that can be done, and we need to really, I mean, those of us, well, I'm not anymore, but those of us, I think you are, Councillor Harvey, you're still involved in the Children's Partnership. So when anybody who's got an influence to try and encourage them to get involved with other things that are going on, that is good, because what is noticeable is when you have partnership meetings of whatever form, they're very often, education is conspicuous by its absence in those meetings. And I mean, there's one or two exceptions to, like BCOT and QMC, but it tends to be right at the older end of it. It's not down the lower end. If we could get them involved, I'm sure it would be much better for all round, and they get stuff out of it as well.
Yeah, when I was thinking of education, I was thinking less of the sort of primary, secondary. It was I think they call it tertiary. The Tech College, Queen Mary's, and that. And if you look at the critical friend analysis, you've got the butterfly graph on there, and you notice that once you get to 20, everybody in Basingstoke disappears, because they all go away to college, and I think that's an issue there. I mean, what happened in my particular case, I went to a course in North London Polytechnic, as it was in those days, up in the People's Republic of Islington, as it was in those days, which was entertaining in itself. But that was the point. I had to go all the way to North London to get, and that was to do with plastics, which is, you thought that was a fairly standard sort of thing, but I mean, that's just going back a while. But it's those sort of issues. Why do they all disappear at that age? It's the lack of that further education there.
Not entirely. I mean, I don't think I think we're getting off the subject here, but there is a great benefit in actually going away from home. It is that thing of leaving the nest and what you learn by being on your own, and especially in Islington, yeah. And I wouldn't want to stop people from doing that. I think that they do actually. I mean, most people that you talk to these days say, yeah, they might go off to university, but we can't get rid of the buggers afterwards. I mean, they stay and they stay and they stay. That won't inevitably be the situation in the long term, I don't think.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of it, of what I wanted to ask, has actually been covered, which was on the education side. On page 14, we talk about Basingstoke and Dean will be home to the best performing schools in Hampshire. Now, I assume we have a strategy which is actually going to achieve that. And on page 20, provision of a new secondary school in Basingstoke by 2029. Well, I think we need more than one. We need them before 2029. Secondly, we talk about perceptions of Basingstoke are often not in line with the reality. Now, I would hope we've identified what those perceptions are, and we have some thoughts about how we're going to change them.
I think the perceptions of Basingstoke are the ones that we all know and rather try and avoid if we possibly can. The fact that it's a gloomy concrete jungle that nobody wants to go to, and in fact, if you bring anybody here, they're always very pleasantly surprised with what they see, and just how green it is and how open it is, and what a good place it is to be. But that's why we need to really take a professional job towards marketing what we have to offer, because these are not things which you can change overnight. These perceptions take a time. You have to demonstrate that you, not just in theory that you've got all the attributes that you want, but in practice you have, and really make them tangible. That takes long-term sustained effort. Building a brand, which is effectively what you're doing, building a product franchise, is not something that you can do in a couple of minutes. We're talking here about a 5-10 year program, and you've got to have real stickability, as Baden-Powell would say, in that process, that once you start with it, you've got to continue. You can't say, well, we'll do it for a couple of years and we'll have changed everybody's attitude towards Basingstoke. It won't happen. But what you do have to do is make them, and the best way you change people's attitudes to it is by offering them something from which they can benefit.
Councillor Cherry.
Thank you. I was just going to make a short comment just to follow up from that, then an observation and then my question, but I'll be brief. The short comment in following up from what you've just said is actually in the sort of over a decade now that I've actually been in Basingstoke, and particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, the amount of times that I hear references, positive or otherwise, to Basingstoke as a town in the media, on drama programmes, just generally slipped into conversation even in the soaps. That's telling me that something's happening out there. It may seem infantile or even sort of superfluous to the way that we're talking about Basingstoke's profile tonight. But actually it's very important, and it's certainly important for me as a migrant to Basingstoke, because I no longer have to explain what it is, where it is. People actually ask me about it now, and I notice the profile of Basingstoke just as a town with a name, not just a new town lumped into all the other new towns, is starting to sort of take hold. And I think it's a perfect opportunity for us now to build on that with some real profile. And I certainly echo what some of the other members have said earlier on this evening about the plans to properly promote, now that we have some consistent messages to promote about our town, borough and its success. I think one of the things I would say in terms of my observation is just sense checking who this document is for, because it starts off very well as a nice easy read and then descends into acronyms and public sector language towards the end, and it's as if someone was kind of losing interest as they got towards the end. And I take it is probably a shorthand, but I would plead, if we want to make it for a wider audience, can we just sort of either explain the acronyms and language, or find another way of describing them, because even the business community get a bit fed up with the public sector having our own particular way of saying things. That said, I think we've done a great job in terms of building the profile of Basingstoke. It's notable the investment we've gained through working and developing the Enterprise M3 Local Enterprise Partnership. And my question really is, we built through that process quite a strong profile with central government, which helped us to get kudos well above our profile as a district council, not just in central government but amongst the business community. And your third bullet on the final slide there is about developing this dialogue. I don't think it's much about developing, I think it's about keeping it going, and I'd be interested to hear how we are keeping that dialogue going to make sure we're absolutely up there in their thoughts as an area of growth beyond the diamonds, beyond the EU funding, and into the future.
I think you're absolutely right. everybody wants to be part of something which is being successful because it reflects well on them. To get government support, we've got to demonstrate that we are a place that has not just the vision, there's loads of places that have vision, but a place that has the vision and the resources and the determination and the general wherewithal to achieve that. If they put their money into it, they will get kudos as well as return on what they do. And it is building that impression with people. Now, to do that, we have to really work through a fairly detailed proposition that we're still in the process of doing at the moment. There's no point in going and talking to people, I want to do this, I want to do that. They say, yeah. If you go to them and say, look, we've worked this through, do this, this will give you this return, which was, I think I mentioned earlier on, Kettering was a prime example of doing that. Then you get a much better listening. That said, I mean, a lot of us do spend quite a bit of time going and making sure that every available opportunity when there's a minister around, we go and bend their ear, even whether it's bending their ear in a positive or a negative fashion. It does help. We've got 2 cabinet ministers currently representing the borough. And it's as well to make full use of that as possible. I think, however, the real key to it is because governments will change. Inevitably, they always do change. The people we have to get to are the key civil servants, because they're the ones at the end of the day who really influence the investment decisions. And we are building up very good relationships with them, particularly in the CLG and in other areas, and the business side too. And we've got to, but then again, it comes back to having a really coherent strategy, a really simple, well put together proposition that you can get them to buy in. But take your point about this. This is a document which has been put together as an initial stab at something, just to really try and get our thinking clear. It's a dictum that I learned as a very young marketing person, that you never actually discover what the product is until you write the leaflet for it. And that's effectively what this is. It's miles away from what one would ever try and sell to anybody. And it may be that we have to have different versions according to our target audiences, because sometimes if you're talking to civil servants, they like it in that way. But that said, you've only got to read the Heseltine document to show how you can talk about these issues in a very clear and impressive way that makes you want to buy into that. If we can achieve for our borough the kind of thing that he's achieved in there in general terms, that will be a tremendous step forward. Well, read it, and I think you'll understand. If you disagree with what he says, you'll understand what I'm talking about the delivery and the way that it's put forward.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. One was really to ask the leader if he sort of shares my perspective, which is that one of the fairly dynamic sectors of the local sort of business sector is the sort of green and environmental businesses. And I've, as someone who fairly frequently visits Norden House, the Innovation Centre, I've been quite impressed by the proportion of tenants at that particular building, which are sort of green or environmental businesses. And ask him whether he thinks it might be an idea to make some reference to that sector within this report, and also to ask him about Appendix 1, because I in a sense understand part of the purpose of Appendix 1, which is in a sense to give a sort of shopping list, I guess, of what are seen as important projects that are in need of funding. But I think one of the risks of Appendix 1 as it's written at the moment is that it rather sort of thinks of economic growth as being largely achieved by building more roads. I'm sure, I'd put to him and ask him whether he thinks that maybe a bit of a sort of rebalancing of Appendix 1, perhaps to, re-emphasise other areas that are worthy of investment, rather than simply building more roads.
Well, the answer first of all on the green businesses is yes, clearly. I mean, that's why we actually allocated £1 million for investment in green projects, and obviously the green projects one would hope will be delivered by local businesses. And we did say at the time when we allocated the million was only the first million. We'll see how it develops over time, but and we've got to make sure that these are things which give us a decent return. But yes, I mean that should be part and parcel of what we do, and very much, for instance, what we are trying to do with Basing View to make sure that that is a green business park is very much in line with that approach. Yeah, I mean, this is work in progress. This thing, I completely take the part when you read down there that almost everything is a road apart from something which isn't, which is a station. It's very transport orientated, and of course what's completely missing from it here is regeneration at the top of the town, regeneration of the leisure park, regeneration which are included elsewhere in the document. So these are there as an example of the types of thing that one would look for. They are specific things which we do need to fund, and therefore it's not a bad idea if you're just starting to warm people up to the concept of what you're trying to do, to say, look, this isn't, we just want you to come and fix one road for us. We have a whole series of projects, because that becomes much more interesting to people to see themselves getting involved in a larger, longer term project. But I entirely take the point that we can rebalance it, we can rework it, we could put a lot of different things in there, which will, I hope, flesh it out and make it even more exciting and even more interesting for people to want to be participants in.
Thank you. Councillor Tucker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go to Appendix 1 and make the comment that it's actually key projects to support and nurture economic growth. So these are supporting things, and if you haven't got your roads right, you know, you've got major problems, in which anybody who's trying to do battle with the local plan would know only too well. As to the mention of the A33 as the only one going north, I would love to see the A340 also mentioned as to be a road that could be looked at, and I wondered if I could sort of throw that in as a question mark, because the tailbacks of the traffic coming into Basingstoke, wherever you put the development in the future, is not appreciated by anybody who lives north of the town. Going back to the comment about the Basingstoke being known, it used to be known with a bit of a joke because of Gilbert and Sullivan, but now it's actually referred to, as you said, didn't you? That we have a lot to offer, and it is not a musical joke anymore. It is something that we should be really pleased. I can remember probably about 5, 6, maybe even more than that years ago, somebody talking about Basingstoke on the radio and saying that actually it's the word Basingstoke that is the problem, which makes it into a musical joke. If it was Stoke Basing, it would be a totally different project, and I think there's an awful lot in that. It's a matter of how you say it, isn't it? But that's just my few comments and questions.
Briefly on that, the reason Appendix 1 actually does it is to support and nurture economic growth. So these are projects which are related to actually building the economy rather than building the infrastructure for everybody living in the place, which is why the A33 would get a major headline there, because you've got quite a number of industrial estates leading onto it, and therefore that's, you know, a key thing. Sorting out some of the roundabouts on the A33 are key for the industry side of it. I take the point about the 340. I mean, many of us, those of us who are about to disappear down the 339, would like to see the 339 improved significantly, but I'm not sure that it would give you the financial return that investment elsewhere might do, and that is always going to be the thing when we look at projects that need to do things, is where is the financial return and the increase in it. I apologise, I can't remember which Gilbert and Sullivan bit the mention of Basingstoke comes from. No doubt somebody can enlighten me at some point, but I can't remember.
Thank you. Councillor Regan.
There's that. Regarding the image of Basingstoke, every time I used to feel depressed about Basingstoke, I used to go to Bracknell. It makes you feel really good. but a comment and questions about this about the growth thing. I mean, touching what Councillor Tilbury said about the companies coming and going. I mean, I've lived in Basingstoke now 50 years, and I've seen a lot of rise and fall. And a lot of companies I work for have fallen. But except for Sainsbury's, about you're talking about, which is expanding, which is good. I worked there for 15 years, and I hope they keep on expanding because they've got a pension with them. But what worries me now is that you only got to look. On a serious note, where I live now, you know, there used to be Smiths. Used to be a good engineering company, took on good apprenticeships and trained people. Now it's retail. So, and you know, the Bagnalls is gone. I mean, there are lots of reasons which I won't go into now, like the changes in the structure of the economy and loss of manufacturing. Have we got the balance right between manufacturing in Basingstoke and retail? Especially what retail is going to go through now. What is the future of retail with online, etc. You know, and I'm also thinking about the expansion of retail that could be onto Basingstoke football ground. So my issue, or my question is, have we got the balance right between retail and manufacturing?
But the answer, of course, is you don't know, because a lot of what has caused businesses to come and go has been changes in technology. I mean, I was walking when it didn't snow in Basingstoke on Sunday, did it? I don't think, well, not heavily. We had 2 or 3 inches there. So I was walking around the garden at home with my phone, showing people in Australia and talking to them on the phone at the same time the snow coming down. Now, who imagined even 2 years ago that I could have something like Skype on my mobile and be talking to my children in Northern Australia at that time? So the speed of technological change is such that it's very difficult to predict what sort of industry you're going to want where. We actually do quite well in Basingstoke, strangely enough, in terms of manufacturing industry compared with a lot of other areas. We've got quite a good level of manufacturing activity. Whether that is whether they're manufacturing the right things, I mean, it's you know, terribly difficult to envisage. People who say we need to set out to attract this kind of an industry into our area can be running a very big risk, because very often you find that industry has come and gone by the time that you've actually got around to attracting people. I think there is but what we do have to do is to try and work out what are the main elements that any business needs to succeed. I mean, connectivity is one at the moment. That's one. Connectivity in terms of either electronic connectivity or in terms of roads and rail and transport and easy access. A decent environment for its employees to live in, so that the best people will want to come and work for those businesses, is a very key element, I think. And then it is down to a question of talking to each individual one and making sure that the council is very closely involved with that business sector, so that it is sensitive and reacts to what is required and sets about trying to make sure that is provided. I think what we want to see, the best way forward, is a good balance within the economy, so that, you know, bits will go down, bits will go up at any one time. If you've got a reasonable balance, then you're never totally protected against the economic cycle, but at least you've got a better chance of getting through that economic cycle in a reasonably buoyant fashion, which, to be fair, we are managing to do. I mean, how many shopping centres are currently getting the footfall that we're getting through the centre of Basingstoke? You know, if you compare the number of shops that we've actually got fully occupied within Basingstoke, it's a lot higher than a lot of other areas. And so we must be doing something right. And whether that's the fact that you can drive in here and park and get in and out very quickly, or whatever it happens to be, but that's right. But you can't stand back and say, well, we've done it and that's it, we're finished. You've got to keep on it all the time, being alert and driving, and actually making sure that we are marketing Basingstoke to those people all the time, so that we want to get new people in and convincing the people we've got that this is the best place to stay.
Thank you. I mean, really, we're talking manufacturing, service and retail, because service is a big part of what we're doing in Basingstoke. So I think service it can't be just manufacturing and retail in terms of promoting future growth and jobs. there are lots of questions on that paper, and I think debated it reasonably well. I'm just wondering if we could look at 2.1, and with your comments that have come through to the leader, and the leader telling us that this is a paper that's evolving, and I would hope evolve relatively quickly, because it would be nice to get it to that next stage where it could be used and distributed. And on that basis, I'm looking to see if we can move to the recommendation as 2.1. Second. Was I moving it? Yes, I'll move it as well. Second. Thank you. Is that agreed, everybody? Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Just a quick check before you finish on the paper, just to say, Leader, in terms of the Eli Lilly, just to finish on the paper, in terms of the Eli Lilly housing proposal, can I just suggest that the wording there might want to be reviewed? Unless you're into physically moving railway lines, I'm not sure how you're going to solve those issues. Just a point. And the local objections, think about it.
Thank you. You're not staying to the end then? No. Thank you, members. And we're moving to item 10, which is referrals from other committees and the council. There are none. Issues referred by cabinet. There are none. Moves us to item 12, the commissioning framework paper, which we will hand over to Natalie to present.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Those of you who are regular attendees at EPP will know that I'm doing a double act as lead officer and presenting a report as well. So when we get to the comment stage, if you could please bear with me so I can just confer with Julia to make sure that we've captured your comments accurately to move them forward. Members, this paper is a follow-up to a paper that was discussed at this committee in June of last year, which set out the draft commissioning framework for consultation. And this report before you tonight gives details of the responses that were received as part of that consultation and how those comments have been addressed in the revised document that's before you in Appendix A. The commissioning framework set out in Appendix A provides a consistent and transparent approach that will act as guidance for how the Council's commissioning activity will be managed over the next 4-year period. As part of the consultation process, officers have engaged with a wide variety of groups and continue to engage with those groups. And those groups include yourselves as elected members, but also Basingstoke Area Strategic Partnership, colleagues from parish councils, and particularly colleagues from the voluntary and community sector. And specific feedback that we have said in the paper that we would give you is from that sector. Their comments on the commissioning framework on the whole have been very positive, and that they felt that the revised version was much improved from the original document. Its readability was improved, it's much clearer, and the focus on outcomes was felt to be a good way forward to meet the needs of our borough in conjunction with ensuring value for money. I think the general feedback that we have is that the framework needed to be more concise and very specific, and I think we've managed to achieve that without losing any of the detail that needed to be in that to help guide the way forward. So members, I'm happy to take questions from you, and then I will ask for any comments from the committee to be passed forward to Cabinet for their consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Councillor Tucker.
Sorry, I know I'm probably a bit pathetic, but on page 41 of 168 it mentions parish council called Brambley, which I think must be Bramley.
Thank you, Councillor Tucker. We'll correct that.
Councillor Gardner.
Pretty much on the same point. Natalie, you say 37 responses were received. I noticed there is one missing, which was from Pamber Parish Council. And I know there was one submitted because I submitted it. However, the points that we raised are covered in the comments.
I am very glad that they're included in the comments, and I will have another check for you. And if I can't find that specific document, then I will come back to you. But I'm glad that the comments are included. Thank you.
Councillor Shaw.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. One was on section 6.5 on page 7 of the report, which refers to the council intending to ensure that potential providers do fully cost their services and don't, in effect, sort of tender on a sort of loss leader basis. My question really was exactly how the council will achieve that objective, and what measures are open to the council, and to ensure that those loss leading bids aren't accepted. And also on Appendix 1, which is the examples of other sort of commission service delivery models, and there's reference to the sort of cooperative council model adopted by Lambeth, as well as to cooperatives and social enterprises more generally. And I wondered if the officer could sort of advise us precisely how the commissioning process that is proposed will foster and develop those particular models of service provision.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. On your first point, I think part of the process that we will go through, and particularly when we get to the stage of looking at procurement and the tender process, is very, very specific about how we need to look and approach things. And I think from that point of view, it's making sure that we understand what it is we are trying to achieve, what outcomes we're trying to reach, and that we make sure that that's reflected in any evaluation criteria that we put forward, so that when we go through a tender process, we are absolutely clear about what it is we are looking for. And that will be part of the process that we work through to get to that stage. So it's at that opportunity, before we get to that formal process, that we can start to ask more questions about what are the full life cycle costs, etc., and to make sure that we undertake very responsible soft market testing, etc., so that we're not in a position when we get to the formal stages of saying, actually, we're not sure what it is we're trying to achieve and how we're going to assess that criteria. So I think it's hopefully that does answer your question, that it's about making sure that before we get to that stage, that the processes that we put in place, which are being developed, so we can certainly take back your comments to make sure that they really are embedded, are picked up before we get to that formal stage. I think on your second question, again, it's about the approach that the council takes, and I would hope that through the documents that you see before you this evening, that we've been very clear that as an organisation we are not being prescriptive about how we want to approach delivering services. We're being very clear that we want to see improved outcomes for our residents based on established needs and emerging needs, and that we want to make sure that where applicable we're looking at value for money, and they all sound very, very sensible approaches to take. So I think we've been very clear that we're not being prescriptive about how a particular service may be delivered as an end result. So we would be looking at, as part of that process that we go through, at the options for how that might be delivered. So that would be taking on board conversations with service users, with the current providers, be they internal or external, potential providers, in order to make sure that we have got a robust view of how we might approach something in the future. And then we wouldn't be coming up with an option, just one option to say, actually that's how we're going to do it. There would be a range of options that we would expect to discuss before we got to the stage where we said that's actually the preferred option that we want to put out a tender or work with an organisation to co-design, or that we want to see an internal service provider continue to deliver. So I think from that point of view, that open and honest approach to how we reach our delivery mechanism for those agreed outcomes is critical.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate what you've just said, Natalie, in terms of the open and transparent approach, and I'm not criticising that at all, and I appreciate the approach that you want to take, so don't read that into what I'm about to ask, really. I mean, looking at this, I think, firstly, I don't think we have a clue what we mean by the word commissioning. This is everything to everybody, and everybody can look at it in so many different ways that I think unless we start to be far more precise in what we actually mean, we really do, well, we're going to wind up living in a process. We're not actually going to get to the things that we want, and I think that's a very real danger. And the reason for that, I think, is the right things done in the right way at the right time at the right price. The process here that we've undertaken thus far has had some pretty major challenges. If just take one example of a very recent, but perhaps the biggest procurement we've done as an authority, which was the procurement of the waste contract. That procurement is actually open to legal challenge, and it should have been, because we did not do an internal public sector review or bid, if you like, or assessment. That is a fundamental part of going through these processes. We didn't do that in that waste contract. So my confidence in the current approach isn't in any way given support or taken away. My confidence in it is shaken because of our experience thus far. Now that process, as I say, could have been open to legal challenge. Now nobody's sought to do that. Nobody has done that. Lucky us. But we then get into what you're proposing here. So I guess my question really is, I think a lot of, and you can see it in the comments, a lot of people don't actually understand or appreciate what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's borne out by the comments. And if you go to page 43 of 161, one respondent said they would like to see more evidence of how commissioning models improves outcomes. I haven't seen anything in here that allays or answers that question. I really do think we're living in a process here that doesn't bear resemblance to reality, and perhaps that comes back to the issue of what you think commissioning is to begin with, because it isn't cooperatives, it isn't social enterprises, it means something very, very different in local government language.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I can't comment specifically on the waste contract because I certainly wasn't involved in the procurement, so forgive me, I'm not able to respond on that. I think what's been important through the conversations that we've had in approaching commissioning is that people did want us to have a transparent approach. The comments that we've taken from the engagement that we've done with a wide variety of people has been that they don't want us to say we're going to follow through on just one particular type of commissioning. Commissioning for this organisation, which I think does come across in the document, is about looking at what are our needs, what are our outcomes that we want to achieve based on those needs, and how might we best approach those to tick the boxes for making sure that we deliver value for money, that we really do respond to what our residents are saying. And I think that this document doesn't give the precise detail, you're right, it was never intended to. It's there as guidance for how we will be approaching things in the future. The devil in the detail will come as part of the process that we follow, which will be built on the commissioning cycle, and there'll be a very specific process that we work through to actually look at areas of service delivery, themes, things that people are identifying as part of the needs, and that's where we'll get down to the nitty-gritty about what we're actually going to be delivering and how. I think for this council, commissioning is about transforming services to achieve those outcomes. We're at the early stage, and I would hope that you would see evidence as we move forward very swiftly that we are actually going to be very precise about the outcomes and the delivery models that we're looking at to use that. But this early stage is to provide the guidance and that framework to make sure that people understand what we are broadly trying to achieve and that they are engaged enough to help support us as we go through and we use them and talk to them and continue to talk to them when we get into specific details about service delivery.
Thank you. I mean, I find that an unusual statement, or a weird statement to understand, in as much that you're saying the waste contract, it could have been challenged, but it wasn't. Well, you could just turn that around the other way and say the same thing, couldn't you?
With respect, the processes are the processes. That somebody else didn't choose to legally challenge it is theirs. The point is, I'm aware that process was not done properly. There was no proper public assessment bid as part of the process, as I understand it, and has been explained to me by people who know this, who understand these processes. That's where I'm coming from. The fact that somebody didn't legally challenge it is the side point.
Councillor Harvey, if you've chosen not to share that with us, that's fine. Right. I'm afraid I was in charge of the numbering list then, and I've got Councillor Parker down to speak next. Is that correct or not? Yes, no, I think you are. Yeah, and then Councillor Cherry. Councillor Parker.
As long as I get a chance through the evening, I don't mind in what order, Chair. Thank you very much. I'd like just to ask the officer a question in regard to the joint shared services. And I know, I'm certain that in earlier papers there was the detail, or there was an informative about how this would be assessed in future as to how the service was being continued in the effectiveness of its delivery. But some of these are just bedding down now. They're just sort of in their early stages of operating. So if the officer would bear with me and perhaps remind me of the process of monitoring under the shared services, how that service, how effective that service is in regard to the delivery to our residents, and also to add to that, how are we monitoring staff issues, in particular in the case of shared services where the partnership authority is managing the scheme.
Councillor Parker, I'm not directly involved in the monitoring of those shared services. What I can assure you is that we do have effective contract monitoring in place, and that we do look at that on a regular basis, and indeed a lot of that information comes back to the performance panel, which reports into this particular committee. So there is a review programme that is outlined for our shared services to ensure that we do continue to make sure that they are delivering effectively for our residents. If you would like more detail of those specific monitoring processes, I can certainly share that, get that and share that with the committee. In reference to monitoring of staff issues on shared services, it would very much depend on the particular arrangement. Because 2P has often been involved. So if staff have been 2P'd over to another organisation, they come under the monitoring of that organisation. And there would have been a transition period in accordance with the legislation for that happening. Where we've got our own staff that are part of a shared service, then again, regular performance review with the other partner to make sure that we are continuing to deliver, and that's part of the contract. But we have our own appraisal systems and our own systems internally, which include regular one-to-ones, etc. So we would pick up any performance through that, and that would obviously make sure that we're delivering through our staff the objectives that were set out as part of that original shared service agreement.
I would just want to say no, I wouldn't want to trouble the officer for the detail. I just needed to be reminded that there was the monitoring some effective form of monitoring, and I had it in my mind, was that going through the performance panel, and that's been confirmed, and for me that's the question answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cherrett.
Thank you, Chair. Two entirely unrelated questions. Firstly is page 6, that's 32 of 168, the papers, yep. In 5.4 we reference the impact of last month's enacted Public Services Social Value Act. And I recognise this commissioning framework predated that enactment, so we wouldn't do a great deal to sort of prejudge how we're going to deal with it. It's probably as much as a suggestion as a question then. As well as what's sort of recommended in 5.5 there, I'm keen to understand how we're going to ensure that the spirit of the Social Value Act is enshrined in our sourcing procurement standing orders, and that when we're evaluating the delivery of services by whatever body, but particularly those who are discharging voluntary and community support functions for us, that proper account is taken of that in the criteria, and that both officers and members understand the difference between lowest price and best outcomes and value, because I think that's what the Social Value Act is trying to drive, and it's something that won't necessarily sit easily with our processes, because on the one hand we have the duty to spend money wisely, on the other hand we have a duty to get the best outcomes for our community. So I'd be keen to see how we're going to deal with that as the framework expands, given that the Act is now live. Apologies for a fairly long question, but I'll come back on the next one in a minute. Go on.
Thank you. I'll answer that one first. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's about being very clear about what the need is and what the outcomes we're trying to achieve are. What I can tell members is that the procurement strategy is currently being revised, and obviously you would expect it to be revised in line with current legislation. So Social Values Act is obviously new legislation that's come forward, and we're also obviously having to make allowances for the new EU legislation that is coming forward that has yet to be agreed, and it may be some time before it is actually finalised. So we're taking account of that, and that would obviously then transfer into how we manage that through our contract standing orders. So please be assured that that is being picked up, and what we do through the commissioning side of things will make sure that when we get to that stage that we are following our own procurement strategy and contract standing orders.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing all those impacts being explained to us in due course. My second question really is picking up partly something Councillor Harvey alluded to earlier on, but also a reference in the feedback. And I think that's page 63 of 168, where one of the comments there is about the needs for skills within the commissioning unit, and I'm referencing this to Councillor Harvey's comment around actually understanding what commissioning is and how we define that. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the development programme that's been going on within the commissioning unit to help exactly understand those things around how we define commissioning, how we apply it in terms of outcomes definition, not outputs and inputs, which are far more familiar to us from the past, how that then translates into further development in terms of performance and supplier management, and far tighter contract management disciplines, irrespective of whether that's a contract for value or a contract for appreciation, given that it's a grant-funded arrangement or something that we do for value other than financial. So I'd just be interested to understand exactly how that's going.
Thank you, Councillor Cherrett. You're absolutely right. There is a development programme in place for the commissioning unit, recognising that this is a new area of work for the council. but we've also picked up on existing skills from across the council that form part of that unit. So we have a very strong procurement team, we have contract management in place, we have performance monitoring where we're looking at improving that across the council and continuing to do that, and skills within commissioning, as you rightly pointed out. Grant funding and to organisations is part of that as well. In terms of doing that, what we've looked at are the existing skills, so almost like a skills map about what we have currently. And what we've also done is we've gone through a commissioning process, if you like, to tender out to an external organisation who have got very good credentials to offer us training based on what we need, where our gaps are, where we need additional support, etc. And that training has now taken place, that took place with the commissioning unit. They've also, through various different external courses, through university courses, etc., we've put in a programme in place for individuals within the commissioning unit to ensure that those skills are there. And that has included also mentoring and coaching and working with external organisations, including local government association, who have been able to advise and put us in contact with people who have been through this process to ensure that we are building a wealth of knowledge from all different angles. What we've done to extend that is we've also worked with our staff internally, and we've just delivered through the same organisation a programme of training for all staff in what commissioning means, what outcomes mean, how that differs from perhaps what we've looked at in the past, how practically we can put that into place, what skills people need to actually be looking at within business units to ensure that things like Councillor Harvey referred to do get picked up as part of internal processes. So things like looking and understanding full life costing. So we think that we've put in quite a robust process up to now, but we're certainly not resting on our laurels. And as you would expect with an organisation that takes its staff very seriously and its staff development very seriously, we're in the midst of appraisal time at the moment, and through those appraisals we're looking at where other skills, additional skills, may need to be looked at and built as we kind of progress, and that will continue throughout the process. So I think I'm confident that we've been able to put in place the basic skills that are needed to actually move this forward, and that we will continue to build on those and build on that development further.
If I come back with a final question and observation then. So the one area missing from that in terms of a key stakeholder group that hasn't had training or awareness at the moment is actually members. I do, however, see that a number of dates were put in the diary to help encourage us to become aware of commissioning and define what it means for us. But I note that those dates were pulled through lack of attendance, and I also note that in spite of sending out a very comprehensive consultation, there's quite a lack of member input to the consultation that you have before us tonight. So I appreciate this is a new area for us, but our opportunity to shape and define it is to be involved. And I can only encourage us all to take advantage for any other training or awareness that's set for us. Is there any other training set?
Thank you, Councillor Cherrett. I think you're right. Yeah, obviously we had put dates in place and they were pulled through lack of attendance. That doesn't mean we've given up and that we're not going to do anything else. I think what we're doing is at the moment kind of taking stock of where we are. There is a map that was pulled together through this committee, and either through that map or through your groups, we would like to be able to talk to you about how you want to be engaged better in the future, how you want to receive and what you want to receive information about. So I think that's going to be very important as we go through, and we are still looking at how the processes will work when we actually start to deliver the programme that comes out of this commissioning. So I'd very much welcome the opportunity to be able to talk to members either through the map or through groups to actually get some more insight into, like I said, how you want to be engaged and on what issues you would like involvement.
Thank you, Letty. Councillor Regan.
Just a similar question. I can't find it where I read it this afternoon, this paper, and it's something about having a compact with people you'd be providing the work to, or the contracts to? Is that a term for contract compliance?
Councillor Regan, the compact is an agreed process that we've signed up to a number of years ago for working principles for how we work with and engage the voluntary and community sector. So it's a document that Hampshire pulled together for all districts, councils within Hampshire, working with their voluntary sectors, that they would adhere to those principles. And we've put that in the document because we believe that it is important that when we're progressing through this process, that we do abide by those principles. And in addition, what we have is a voluntary and community sector working group that is working very closely with us on making sure that at every step of the way we are engaging that particular sector, that we're responding to how they want to be engaged, that we're looking at the concerns that they are raising and actually having very, very open dialogue with them for how we move forward. So we've gone beyond what we've agreed as part of the compact principles and are engaging our local community and voluntary sector much more.
Thank you, Natalie. Yes, I think it's interesting. Councillor Regan should ask, what is a compact? A compact is an agreement drawn up by voluntary and community groups and the public bodies together, setting out guidelines for how they should behave towards each other. I also looked it up this afternoon as well. Thank you, members. Is that a question coming, Councillor Shaw? Just got in there in time. Thank you.
Yeah, one question I wanted to ask is, and it may be a difficult one to answer really, but how streetwise is the council in the area of commissioning? Because from my perspective, on both sides of the commissioning equation, as both as a sort of provider and also as a commissioner in the past, one thing that it's actually very difficult to teach is that sort of, that wisdom that comes from experience and hard learning, which is to do with sort of understanding, what can happen in commissioning processes and, how, providers may have very different wishes, aspirations, needs than, the commissioning body, and just generally being sort of streetwise to, the potential for, error, and so on and so forth. And I really just wanted to ask how streetwise we are, because it's something that can't necessarily be taught in academic terms.
I like your terminology. I'm going to use that as best practice in the future. I think we actually do have more experience than we perhaps would give ourselves credit for. I think we would all acknowledge that over numerous years that we have commissioned services. We might have called them something different, and actually what the commissioning approach does is enables us to be quite systematic about looking at all of the opportunities there are, rather than simply being opportunistic when the occasion arises. So that's not to say that we wouldn't take account of any opportunities that came our way. Say we weren't looking at something until year 4 of the programme and an opportunity came up for something to happen in year 2, then of course we would look at that. But this gives us a chance to be able to look at things in a bit more depth, in a controlled way, to make sure that we do use the lessons that we've learned through previous experiences and experiences of others, because we are talking to other people, in order to avoid some of the pitfalls and the mistakes that have been made. So I'm quite confident that we have got those skills in place. We will always learn lessons from what we do, and we will make sure that throughout the programme there's a constant review process, so that we're learning as we go, as well as making sure that we've got that streetwise kind of ability to be able to deliver those services.
Thank you, Natalie. Members, I don't know if you want to take the same course of actions we did on the last paper, and as much we've discussed it relatively in depth, unless anybody wants to add specifically more. I think we could even try and ask Natalie if she could sum up on what's been said. I know she's doing a double act here. and then perhaps we could, look to the recommendation. Certainly, Councillor.
Just the one comment that I would like to make is that out of this whole process, and I think there's been a lot of incredible detail work that's been done in preparing these sort of our rule book and ways of operating. I do just hope that in application this is not going to put off the smaller provider entering into the process of bidding for providing services, and that's a concern that I do have, and I hope that will be borne in mind and sort of experience as we move forward with this commissioning process and means of procuring for services. But an eye's kept on that, because it would be where we sort of, on the one hand, want to encourage local providers for us to procure from, and yes, they've got to meet all the standard requirements, but sometimes when a small employer looks at the paper process and the sort of the language used, they tend maybe to say, well, that's not for us, and I think that's would be a shame.
Councillor Parker, just to reassure you that we certainly will take that into consideration when we're looking at each different element of the commissioning programme. Just to reassure you also that we have put in place training already for the voluntary and community sector and small and medium enterprises, so that they can understand better what they need to do to prepare for commissioning. We will also be looking at how our grant system runs alongside commissioning, and that's not to say, that's to say that we will continue to have some kind of grant schemes that run alongside contractual arrangements. The group that I mentioned earlier about the voluntary and community sector, part of the very next meeting that we're actually having is a conversation with them about, okay, from the feedback that you've been getting from the people that you talk to on a regular basis, what else do we need to put in place to make sure that people are well prepared to be able to be in the best possible position to be able to be involved in this process? So I hope that reassures you that we're taking it seriously and that we will continue to do so.
Thank you, Natalie. And I think if I could just share my experiences in terms of sort of bodies that are receiving funding in Tadley. CAB in Tadley is a relatively small operation, and they have handled the process of commissioning, and they've really commented a number of times about the support that they've had from officers in terms of that process. And the same with even smaller ones such as Home Start. Again, comments saying that they really have had their hands held along the process. And thank you, Natalie. So if I can ask you, are you ready, or do you want some time? A couple of minutes. Thank you, members. Natalie is got her act ready, I suppose.
Right, okay, thank you, members. As you'll appreciate, it's quite difficult to field your questions, think about the answers, and scribble down notes at the same time to feed back to you. So please let me know, because obviously it's comments that, as a committee, we want to put forward to the Cabinet to consider. So please let me know if there's anything you feel I've missed. I haven't included the comments from Councillor Tucker and Councillor Gardner about where we might need the sort of housekeeping things, so I will make sure that we look into those. There was a comment generally from councillors about making sure that we foster that wider approach to service delivery, and to make sure that we do take account of the different mechanisms for how we can deliver. So that includes social enterprises and that type of commissioning, as well as the more traditional routes. That we ensure that we have a transparent approach to what we do, and also we take account of being precise about what it is we want to do and we want to achieve. That we also need to take account of having proper and accurate criteria for how we evaluate any commissioning going forward, and that linked to ensuring that we updated our procurement and our contract standing orders, so that we took account of new legislation like the Social Values Act. That we continue to have a development programme to build on existing skills and existing training for the commissioning staff and for staff in general. And then we moved on to talk about how members might continue to be involved and might be involved more so in the future, and a commitment to talk to members about how they might want that to be to look like in the future. There was a conversation about the compact and making sure that we obviously understood what that meant, and that we would add that into the glossary to make sure that that was very clear what we meant by that that particular terminology. And a comment about making sure that we learnt from previous experience, and that we ensured that our lessons learned would make us more streetwise in how we approached commissioning, to ensure that we aren't making repeated mistakes. And that we would continue to work with voluntary and community sector and small and medium enterprises to continue with engaging them in training and ensuring that they were as prepared as they could be for entering into the new approach that we're taking with commissioning.
Thank you, Natalie. Oh, that's very, very, very well done. Makes it simple. Can I move that recommendation? Thank you. Members, we move to item 13, which is paper D, Basingview report on the annual business plan for the Basingstoke/Mews Regeneration Partnership. And if I could ask, and he's already here, thank you, Simon. Simon will present that paper for us, this paper. Members, yes, just being reminded, of course, we have a pink paper, so section 6 of the report has been lifted out and put into pink papers, and talks about Pacific sites, etc., etc. So if there is a need for anybody to talk about those specific sites, can you please let me know? And I'm sure Simon, because he's conscious of protecting his hard work, will pounce on us if he thinks we're wandering into that bit of it as well. Thank you, Simon.
So I was pressing the wrong button. Thank you, Chair. Good evening. I just wanted to provide a brief introduction to the report before going to questions, to set the scene for the second annual business plan for the multi-site partnership between the Council and Mews. Last July, we brought the first initial business plan to this meeting, and set the scene for the partnership, 15-year partnership. The purpose of the business plan is to look at how we commit our time, the council's resources, and also from Muse and where they commit their time and resources during the course of each business.
Sorry, could you change
That's right. Okay. Yeah, so the business plan is to sort of set the scene for the year ahead, to provide details of where the money is being spent. I think in the next financial year, for 2013-2014, the principal emphasis of the business plan is moving towards delivery on the ground, moving really from gearing up, preparing, committing time into from professional fees, undertaking work for the public realm, design, development, and moving towards actually construction of the public realm works on site. There's a considerable amount of time and effort which has gone into the design of the public realm works over the course of the last 6 to 9 months. And this year ahead is an important year for actually making tangible change on the ground, and to start those sort of first steps of beyond demolition of enabling works and changing people's perceptions of an area. We can't change all the buildings overnight, but what we can do is start to change people's perceptions of the common areas in between, the roads, the pavements, the lighting, and to give that renewed sort of feeling that actually the change is now upon us, and that breeds confidence and hopefully creates momentum in creating new investment as well. So a large part of the business plan for this year has been devoted purposely to the public realm works, and Appendix 2 of the report sets out concept scheme proposals which the Muse design team have prepared in conjunction with the council's internal design team, and would then form the basis of more detailed plans to be evolved for tendering design. There's ongoing consultation with the building owners, as part of the work involves taking back landscape strips along the frontage of every building in Basingview. And that will then form part of a rolling programme of works from really late summer this year through to autumn 2014. The other area I just wanted to briefly dwell on is the sort of key targets for the year ahead, public realm being one of them, completion of the master plan study, transport strategy, the branding strategy are all key areas. That then leads to marketing, and for Muse to be in a position in the late summer, autumn, be looking to sort of market Basingview to a wider audience beyond Basingstoke itself, but looking at the more regional areas. The demolition of Scott House, that's being earmarked for probably late autumn time, to take that through to the winter, and for Muse to look at submitting the first scheme proposal during this year as well. So I'll draw to a close on that point, and then seek questions on the report, please.
Councillor Harvey.
Continue with the trend of the evening, should I just pass a couple of comments as well as ask the question I want to ask and get it all done at once?
We can't hear you very well, I think.
Would you like me to ask the question but also pass some comments and get it all done at once? Continuing the trend of the evening.
I think if we can try to stay with that, yeah, if it gets too long we'll come to a stop, but I think if we can stay with that, we'll be good.
Okay. Well, first thing, can I commend Simon and the team for what they've done and having sat on the map and sat on the way that it's gone through and the way you conducted this. It is impressive, it's a good job, and it really does show yourself and the work that the team have done in good light. And I hope that the people now sat in the office next door regarding Manydown are taking note of the way that you've approached Basingview as a way to approach that master plan as well. I think the issue that I wanted to raise with is that the comment to Pat, having sat through all of that, is the opportunities that are presented here. Because there are some pretty huge nuggets that need to be delivered this year to see the success follow through. And I'm conscious of the cross-party support you've got on the rest of it, and delivering on, for example, the Network Rail. I mean, it would actually be nice to have a planning application come forward in Norden that we could support And in that context, and having previously fought like battle royal against 440 microflats on Gressley Road and having to take it to a call-in, as and was, it's nice to have something here that I think, is going to generate something pretty positive. The question I really have is around, and perhaps you can explain in some of the other uses, again, hotels and the other bits that were talked of. I think it would be useful just to understand where we are on that front, and that's a personal question, because that was an important part of where we were last year and where we need to go again in the future. So whether it's developed since the MAP meeting, I don't know, but any elements you can share in public in terms of where we are on the future of a hotel on the site is important because of its relationship to what goes on Gressley Road and how that might be a positive part of the planning application. And the bridge and timetables and such for the new footbridge across. The more north-south links we have, the better, considering the very, very few that we do have at the moment.
I've been told by Network Rail potentially the bridge could be installed even as early as December this year. This point in time, the planning application's been submitted. They've now appointed a main contractor. They've actually, for people who've driven past the site, and I was my first trip to the top of the AA Tower last week, gave me a wonderful bird's eye view of the enabling works which are now on site, on the Gressley Road site. And we hope that the contract could be unconditional as soon as June, maybe July this year, and the bridge will be part of the early works. It's subject to rail possession, but I'm looking forward to the day or evening when it goes in, is lifted in position, and should be quite a sight when it does so, and will be a key. It's part of that sort of confidence building of showing something's happening, which is meaningful and tangible. On the hotel, and there's still the work which Muse have been doing, because they're doing two contracts for us on the hotel scheme, and the council's desire was to see a good quality hotel, a business class hotel, and that's one of the sort of challenging areas of the marketplace at this time. And from the feedback from Muse is that if we do want to try and wait and I suppose deliver the better hotel, as against, say, a sort of budget level hotel, that may take a little bit longer, and will be the subject of a report probably in May, which will come through separately. Certainly from feedback from businesses, I think there is a feeling that business class hotel is important, and that will be part of the infrastructure for Basingview for the longer term. Part of the challenge is around then funding. Business hotels don't typically come with leases compared with budget hotels, and that will be one of the sort of challenges, creating the business case, and which is where Gressley Road becomes part of the hopefully the formula for success in the future is with Gressley Road committed on site. So by waiting a little bit longer, we might give ourselves a better chance of securing that better hotel with an occupier who will bring demand for weekday accommodation for quite a considerable number of staff. So it's work in progress still at this stage.
Councillor Shaw.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was a question in relation to 7.1.3 on page 74 of 168, which is makes a reference to the process for the landscaping works. And I wanted to ask if this was an opportunity to perhaps incorporate some of the stuff that we've discussed previously in terms of the council's wider work on commissioning, and specifically whether it's practicable to include, outcomes within this procurement exercise, and also if it's feasible to construct the tender process in such a way that fulfills the aspiration of allowing smaller providers or subcontractors to play a part in the works as a whole.
The landscaping works as a package, and part of the work which has been done over the past few months has been looking at how to break down the commissioning of essentially 3 packages of work. Lighting is subject to PFI scheme, so is kept as a separate entity. The roads contract very specialist. So we've broken that back to sort of public realm works, the soft landscaping, where it would be an open tender because of the size of the contract. Parties with sufficient track record experience will be an important part of that from the council's perspective as well, and that they can deliver their experience but also have a sufficient size to be able to take on certain contracts. It doesn't necessarily preclude smaller companies, but there will be a sort of threshold to just make sure that they can actually deal with the size of the contract involved and wouldn't disappoint, I suppose, in terms of or over-promising if it was beyond the reach of maybe some companies. So there'll need to be some testing in terms of what those capabilities are.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's plenty of comment made about the work on the frontages of the buildings within Basing View. What work is proposed in the short to medium term on the outer shell, in particular along Churchill Way, to improve the appearance of the site? At the moment it does look a bit tatty in places.
The Churchill Way has been subject to some works quite recently to start thinning out the vegetation, and you may have seen as you're driving into town along Churchill Way East, the central reservation has been tidied up. Where actually it does start to now look tattier is particularly along the east, or the northern boundary, sorry, of Churchill Way East, alongside Basing View, where they haven't quite finished the works yet, but they've gone through, stripped out a lot of vegetation which is overgrown, with shielding buildings, but it's just become too overgrown. And the next stage is putting planting back into some of those gaps in between, then allowing the planting to grow in a more managed way. We don't think it had been really touched for certainly 10 to maybe even 20 years in places, and it was just part of that creating a cleaner, sort of clear sort of boulevard effect driving into the town, driving out of the town. But it's in that transition at the moment, and hopefully we'll start to see a lot more improvement over the course of the next few weeks as the works are completed.
Thank you. You had me worried there in a moment you talked about thinning out, which is about the last thing we wanted. But the replanting in a managed way to actually shield some of the less attractive aspects in the short term would be welcome.
One of the buildings which is worthy of note is the Glasshouse site as well, which is the small building surrounded by a blue hoarding but very overgrown. It's worth mentioning that is subject to legal discussions at the moment to improve it. The owner has agreed to demolish the building back to the shell of the building, effectively a concrete frame, and allowed the council to take on all the landscaping of the perimeter of the site as well. And we're hoping that work will be undertaken during the summer.
Councillor Regan. Yeah, right, one day. It's I endorse what Councillor Harper said about the amount of work that's gone into this, because going back into a long time ago when I was a cabinet member with Councillor Shaw, there was a lot of one of the projects was trying to push through the regeneration of Basing View because it was tired. Then come along the tragedy of 9/11, the chip markets and the private company was going to do property development drops out. So it was tired then, and it's certainly tired now. But my question is going back to the hotel, because I remember at that time the drive was for a 5-star hotel because there seemed to be a lack within the town of that standard rather than budget. So is that the aim, is to have a 5-star hotel? And that's not a complaint.
There was a certain amount of work done a few years ago to look at what we thought would be the, I suppose, realistic sort of ambition for the hotel. 5-star was felt to be out of reach for not just Basingstoke, but the 5-star market is very specialist, but more of a business class hotel, which is a step up from a traditional budget hotel, which provides restaurant, extra amenities, conferencing accommodation as well. So the objectives which we set out in the competition to the developer market were very much around, we wanted that business class, added sort of facilities for Basingstoke and Basing View, and that's sort of where we sort of pitched our stall at the moment. So it's probably in star ratings, because the hotel market seems to have moved away from star ratings. hoteliers, and it's sort of service levels. So what they class as a business class is probably equivalent to sort of 3.5 to sort of 4 star.
Councillor Tilbury.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I'd certainly echo Paul's comments earlier. I mean, I've been involved with the Basing View map over many years, and not as much as I'd like to have been, but I think you've done a superb job of moving this forward after a long time. And things like Gresley Road. I mean, look about the Sardine City. I mean, what were we thinking of there? But I think this is the trouble. If you look at it, it is very much of its time, the 70s. I mean, I've got and when it was planned even in the 60s. I mean, I've got a copy of the Gazette from '62 when it was Basingstoke first town of the motor age, and it was all this concrete. But it was all designed for people to drive around. There's no thought as to what they were going to do when they ever got out the car. But this is actually quite nice. It's actually quite livable, it's quite a nice environment to work in, and being so close to the town, that's the big advantage. Because a lot of people, you're going to have, because you don't have staff canteens anymore, we ain't got one here, but you've got to go and get something to eat, and you just want to get out of the office. And whereas if you're stuck in Basing View, it was almost been like in a prison camp up there. It wasn't a particularly nice environment for people. What's being planned is much better. It's much more low level, and I've already got an idea how many sort of capacity. I suspect there's probably less capacity in this because of the low of it, but the reality is at the moment when we had all those high-rise blocks, they've been empty for probably most of the last 20 years, but I think there's a lot of capacity, and I think it is very good, and it's nice to see some progress on this at last, and thanks for all your work, Simon.
I'd just like to say thank you on behalf of the whole team, obviously within the Basing View project team, internally, and also from a Muse team as well. There's a considerable number of people around the design team table on a regular basis at the moment, and it's started to build up real momentum as a project across that.
Councillor Mrs Tucker.
Thank you. Some of what was worrying me has already been said, which is sort of tidying up the outside, things like that. It's the nitty-gritty, it's the little things that really upset me when I noticed it says noted that dropped curbs should be incorporated. Could we have dropped curbs that actually work and don't turn into ponds at the bottom? Because I'm sure that Councillor Leeks would say it's not much fun going down into the water, and mums with pushchairs and people who are blind haven't a clue that they're going to be walking into, it sounds such a simple thing, but it appears to be very difficult for people to achieve. So when you get somebody doing it, can you make sure that they do it properly?
Sure. Our contracts administrators will be keeping a very close eye, and I think from the benefit of we took the view when we were looking at how do we spend the £3.3 million of money to get the best effect across Basing View, and one area we started to look at in a lot of detail was the roads and the pavements, because the landscaping can make a change, but also actually new roads and new pavements, which are a considerable cost, but actually we felt are important.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tucker makes a really good point, because we know we do suffer in certainly around Borghurst and Tadley, where we've had a lot of new pathways, cycleways put in, which are really good, but this sort of add-on effect of lowering a curb seems to lower the surface, and that's a puddle. And Borghurst shops, you dodge the traffic to get to the shops because of the puddles that Hampshire have created. Councillor Sherrick.
Thank you, Chair. At the risk of causing Simon and the team to blush even further, then, I wanted to pick up. It's a positive project, large scale, but great news in terms of regenerating that particular area of the town. I think, aside from just the scheme, the fact that the way this report and business plan has been prepared is an absolute dream for councillors like certainly myself, who are very busy, have other jobs to do, and actually find it so easy to be able to get very detailed information set out very simply in a way that enables us to get right to the heart of things. So examples of the KPI regime, examples of the reporting, just the way in which the complexity of the scheme is brought to life in a relatively short, for the scale of the project, report is exceptionally helpful, and I really do think it's an area of exemplary practice that we need to sort of encourage elsewhere in the council. I do, however, have a question. Because you've set the information out so simply, it enables me to look at things like the risk schedule, and I've drawn attention to the final page of the risk schedule, 118 of the pack of pages. At this stage, encouraging to see there's no red risks. However, I notice the E4 risk on page 118 of 168 is creeping ever close to the top of the amber risk, and therefore likely to tip into red. And again, looking at the probability impact assessment of there within asbestos at Scott House kind of worries me a little bit, because it's at that high end of the scale, and also because we have previous experience of asbestos within Basing View. So what are we needing to do to manage that risk? I'm sure it is being managed, but it does look as if it's one that's likely to come true. So can you just reassure me on that one, please?
Yes, well, I think, as it's rightly say, after a previous building where we had asbestos within the structure, which was unusual, what we wanted to flag, that buildings of an age, 1970s, early 1980s, potentially there could be asbestos. The building in this case has been stripped out already by the previous owner. We're aware there is some residual asbestos in ceiling tiles. We're also bringing in specialists to look at what is the risk beyond what we can see, and it's what we can't see, which is difficult to quantify. And in the report we prepared, in recommending we take back Scott House, and in the budget we've allocated a reasonable contingency for the unknowns, and it's quite possible for, if there is something within the structure, which in the case of Loddon House it was just done as I suppose it was, asbestos was there to hand and used as packers, hidden deep within the structure, which we've never found until you start dismantling the building. So there may be some residual risk which we then have to quantify and keep a contingency to one side. But we will do all we can to try and mitigate it where we can, where it's known or capable of knowing.
Councillor Marks.
Thank you for this. It's quite detailed. But could you please bring me up to speed on the retail side, or where you expect people to go when they're not working on the site, apart from home? It was mentioned earlier about lunch and things like that, but unless I've missed it, could you just bring me up to speed on the retail or possibly food outlets, whatever?
There would be some provision within the master plan for people to walk. I suppose to Festival Place is a relatively short walk from Basing View, and potentially there may be scope for further outlets to be brought forward within the context of the master plan as well. It's probably difficult to go into sort of too much detail in this stage in this sort of open part of the report.
Just to put it in perspective, I'm replacing resigned councillor tonight. I've already just had them a short while.
Councillor Leeks.
It's following on from Councillor Tucker's question. Instead of just going to perhaps the minimum levels of disability access, etc., perhaps now we've got a sort of virtually blank page that we've gone to. Perhaps we need to go to higher than minimum in respect of disability and drop curves, etc., so that disabled people are well truly catered for, and not just down to the minimum levels. So who's to say in a few years' time that the minimum levels aren't going to be increased. So it's best, I think, to look at it now. So that, yeah, that's all.
So I think we've got the opportunity now. We're starting with a blank sheet of paper.
Thank you, members. I think the general message from councillors is this is a good report. I think councillors are fully supportive of this regeneration programme, and it will result in I think a fantastic asset for the borough. And I would move the recommendations as listed within the paper. Thank you, members. Thank you, members. Item 14 is the single issue panel update, which I think we can hopefully note. Councillor Shaw.
I just had a question, Chair. It was on the minutes, and there's reference in the minutes to the panel having discussed the Mals refurbishment. I'm keen to keep abreast of this, really, and wanted to ask when the panel will next receive a report on the Mals.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Shaw. I mean, obviously we don't have that answer, but officers have given us the nod that they will certainly come back to us on that one. Any other comments on Councillor Leeks?
As it was mentioned to me earlier, can you remove an S on 163, second paragraph? It makes me sound very knowledgeable otherwise.
Thank you, members. I think that brings us to a conclusion of our meeting. Thank you and good night.